Welcome to the It's Your Choice podcast, where we learn how to rewire our brains to live the life we desire. On with the show. Welcome to It's Your Choice podcast. Joining us today, we have Debbie Owen. Thank you, Debbie, for joining us.
Great to be here, Sally.
Debbie, you're a transformational leadership coach, spiritual director, and a retreat leader dedicated to guiding people through life's crossroads. And so, with that, what does neuroscience tell us about our personality patterns and transformation?
Those are really great questions. And one of the things that I like to mention start out with is in order to understand transformation, we have to start with self-awareness. And I have this little acronym that helps me with that because I call it the arc of integrity, and arc is ARK. So it would be self-awareness plus self-reflection equals self-knowledge. And so once we have an understanding of, oh, this is what triggers me, I'm paying attention, I kind of raise up to the, it's as if I float up to the ceiling and I look down and I say, oh, look, I'm doing that thing again.
Hmm.
There I am. I'm doing that thing again. So that's that self-awareness piece. And then the reflection is, well, okay, I got to begin to recognize that I'm doing it, and what are the situations that cause me to do it? How am I feeling when I'm doing it? That's that self-reflection piece of it. We can talk about attachment theory that gets involved in it as well, our childhood experiences. And then once you begin to work through all of that, then we get to self-knowledge. And the beauty of self-knowledge is then we have a choice about how we're going
Right.
to act, or instead of react, we respond. And as far as personality goes, I have been studying the Enneagram from a number of people. And I've also been studying Dan Siegel's new model. Well, it's not new for him. He's been working on it, or he and his group have been working on it for 20 years. And they have, over the last 20 years, they've had 50,000 narrative interviews, and what Dan has done is place the results of those interviews right over top of the Enneagram. So even though a lot of people say, "Oh, the Enneagram isn't valid and everything," and he even says it's a theory. Um, I mean, 20,000 narrative interviews over 50,000 interviews over 20 years. That's, we're starting to head toward more than just a theory on that.
Well, and everything starts at a theory, right? We have to have a theory first to then
Right.
figure out what part of it is accurate, not accurate, true, not true, whatever. But we have to start somewhere.
Right, right. And so then what he's done is there are still triads, just like in the traditional Enneagram. And those triad, he calls them the agency vector, which is based on that gut or body triad, and the bonding
Mhm.
vector, which you we would say is part of the heart triad, and then the certainty vector, which is that piece of the head triad. And so, what does neuroscience have to do with personality? It's our proclivities toward how we respond and react. Some of it is just the way we're born, some of it is our childhood influences, and that some attachment theory is part of that as well. And as I said, the whole point of self awareness, the arc of integrity, is then to be able to make informed choices about, well, this is my natural proclivity. Do I really want to react that way, or do I want to choose a different response? Yeah. So people who say, I can't help it, that's just the way I am.
I was just
Mm,
gonna say that. I was just gonna say, so for those of
yeah.
you and who say, well, it's just the way I am. And I have a few friends that are popping into my head right now. But I can see them, they're like, well, it's just the way I am. And I always respond a little bit. I don't always say it, but at least in my head, always is, well, that's your choice.
It is. It is. We get to choose whether we're going to react out of without thought, or we're going to respond because we've gone through that arc of integrity, and we are responding in ways that help us uh, have relationships with people based on our values.
Hmm. And I can understand that comment of that's just the way I am because we're so used to it, we just don't think about it. Right? We
Right.
just react, we just respond, we get that feeling. I have a friend of mine, she is, and she would even call herself it, so it's okay, just like a very sensitive, highly sensitive person. And I
Okay.
said, "Well, what?" Like we've had short conversations about it. And she says, "Because that's just the way I am." And I said, "Well, no, that's a choice to be that way. And it's not good, it's not bad. Like it's whatever it may be. If you're happy being that way and choosing to be that way, okay. But then it's your choice. So you can't get upset with people who say or do things because you're choosing to be a highly sensitive person and you're
Mm.
choosing to react the way you're reacting."
Right. Right. It comes down to being aware, reflecting, understanding that's the way you normally go, and then saying, no, but I don't want to do that now. Because why wouldn't you want to do that? It's because it's not helping your relationships. And
Right.
relationships are everything in life. Nothing else really matters that much. The only thing that really matters are our relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. It is
Mhm.
as you said, the only thing and the most important thing is relationships. Stuff comes and goes, money can come and go. Nothing else really matters that much. And our health, relationships and our
Right.
health.
Right, right. And I guess we could talk a little bit more about that in the sense that we could talk about habit loops because that's that neuroscience piece of
Mm,
it, right? And so you have a trigger or a cue, which is it's a signal to the unconscious mind that it's time to do that habit, that thing that you keep doing. And then then that leads to the routine, which is the habit itself. And then you get the reward, whatever that payoff is. Um, and sometimes the payoff isn't really the one you want. And so if you
right.
don't like that, back up to what triggered you and then decide, okay, I'm not going to do that same old thing because I don't like where it leads me to.
Right. So how long, because I've heard different things. I said, to start a routine, to do something new, it takes so long. In your experience, how long does it take to have a new belief, to kind of rewire the mind to not respond or react or not crave that chocolate or coffee,
Yeah.
or even just to change it instead of rolling out of bed and having that coffee first thing in the morning to waiting an hour and a half because I heard it's best to wait 90 minutes before having caffeine. And to just change those routines. Like, is it different when it comes to exercise, to food, to those things, or is all kind of rewiring the brain to change our habits and beliefs the same amount of time?
That's a really good question. And I'm not afraid to say I don't know. My gut reaction is it probably depends a lot on the context of whatever that habit is that you want to change. Um, like for instance, if you're in a situation, let's take the example of somebody who wants to quit smoking,
Okay.
and he shows up in a bar. Let's have Joe, and he shows up at a bar with a drink in his hand, and this is his unconscious trigger to smoke. Um,
Hmm.
and so that's his routine, and so he has to decide: is he going to keep showing up at that bar, or is he going to do something different so that he's not even in that context? So that has a lot to do with whether or not a habit is easy or hard to break. Um, and my understanding also is that if you can shift your thought process to be thinking about something else and doing something else, then that helps a lot as well. So there are things you can do that will help make the transition easier. Um, changing a habit is never easy. So,
Sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to let you know about the Mind Matters weekly newsletter that is full of actionable tips to help you rewire your brain to live the life that you desire. Sign up for it at sallypeterson.com. And when you do, you'll get the top 5 brain hacks for peak performance. Again, you can get it at sallypeterson.com. Now back to the show. But I think I mean, I think what might even be harder is our unconscious thoughts.
Right.
Because a habit, as you said, we can for the smoker, and I've got friends that smoke, and their trigger is when they're, having some drinks and hanging out. It's that response to have a cigarette with it. Um, but and so that changing those patterns makes sense. Not that it's going to be easy, but I think it's a little bit easier because we have control over going to those places, having those drinks, doing those things.
Right.
Where our mind, when that thought pops into my head of, oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, I'm stupid. Oh, I can't, remember anything, or like whatever, all of those kind of negative thoughts that just out of nowhere, we could be just
Yeah.
going for a nice walk, and all of a sudden in our head pops this thought of a negative something. How how can we try to rewire and change our brain to not
Yeah,
believe those
that's
thoughts? I mean, ultimately, I'd love to say not to have them, but let's be realistic. It's the brain, and there's going to be some forever. But it's just when we do have them, can we reduce having those thoughts, and then how do we deal with them to kind of disconnect those neurons and pathways to hopefully not have those thoughts anymore?
yeah, that's what is often called part X, that negative voice that's in your head. And the it's the resistance to doing the things that you want to do. It's protecting you. It's trying to protect you. But in actuality, what it does is it keeps you within such confined, safe boundaries of what you already know and have experienced that it's very hard to break out of that. But that's part X. And if you name that voice, it's a lot easier to recognize it, have a conversation with it, and tell it to go take a hike. And that gets into a little bit into internal family systems as well, where we have the different parts of us that have had different experiences and have their own personalities. And as Schwartz always says, every part of you is welcome. It's just that you want to be able to help each of those parts that are resisting or that are fearful or that may have whatever the what we would call a negative experience. You want to be able to welcome them and also ask them to take a seat and let them know that they don't have to work so hard anymore because the self is what Schwartz calls it. The self is in control, and the self will be taking care of the rest of you, and that part doesn't have to work so hard. For me, as a faith based person, I would say that that's the Holy Spirit working within me. Yeah, myself is part of it, and I would say that I know I can't do it by myself. I can't do it by myself. So I depend on God to help me walk through those hard times when my part X, my negative voice, is trying to bring me down, halt me from doing something productive, telling me that I'm not good enough, any of those things. So depends on what your perspective is, but there you got several to choose from.
Yeah, it was actually even happening to me earlier today. I was going for a walk, and it was just, you know, and I can't even remember what it was that popped into my head, but it was just one of those. It didn't even make sense, because I was in a good mood. I'm going for a
Yeah.
walk, and it was warm outside and sunny, and I'm like, "It's so nice." And then something popped in my head, and then I just thought, "Thank you for sharing. I'm not focusing on that right now." And then I, consciously thought about other things and positive things and good things, and just also just being in the sun and feeling that as well. And so
Mhm.
sometimes that's what I'll do is I'll just be like, "Thank you for sharing. I'm not focusing on that right now."
Yeah. It's not, sometimes it's just much easier to wallow in the negative feeling, because at least you're feeling something, right? And it
Right.
almost gives you a sense of control and agency to say, I'm just going to wallow in this yucky feeling because I can. And one of the things in this polarized country right now, one of the things that I've been kind of experimenting with and focusing on is cultivating a sense of awe. And I've started taking, so I live in the middle of the woods on a lake here in Maine, and the sunsets and the sunrises are just spectacular. We love to ski, and so we'll go up to the top of Sunday River and just look out, and the scenery is again spectacular. And so I'm starting to just try to find every day one picture that and I'll take out my phone and actually take a picture and say, this is my awe moment for right now. And maybe I'll have more, but at least I have one. I'm looking for one moment of awe. And what that does is it completely shifts how your body feels. Because when you have a sense of awe, it's just, I mean, it taps into your parasympathetic system, and it really it shifts everything, and that helps shift your thought process as well. And then if depending on what that moment of awe is, then I'll add wonder, which is a form of curiosity. I wonder, I mean, how does that happen, or why does that happen, or wonder who else is seeing this and experiencing this with me. And there's so many different directions you could take with wonder once you have that incredible experience of awe. And so I'm finding that that's a really helpful way to combat that part X and that feeling of I'm not good enough and things like that.
That wonder part is really good because I mean there's so many things just in nature itself that um is a wonder. Like
Yeah,
how does the tree, I've got some seeds that I had just from some oranges and lemons and stuff, and I always feel bad throwing them away. So I have some and they've sprouted and now they're growing. I mean, I have so many, I don't know what I'm going to do with them. I'll have to like give them away. Or I just figure I'll go for a walk and plant them in different
right,
places outside and hopefully they grow. But it's just amazing from this seed of the lemon that if I let it dry out, nothing will happen and it'll just deteriorate and break down. But I soak it,
soak it,
put it in a
put it in
napkin for a
a
bit, it sprouts, it's now growing and it's amazing. I mean, and so we can really look at just
bucket
as a tree or a
or
plant
a
as the
plant as the
simplest thing,
simplest thing.
especially um where I am, we've got some really old buildings and I mean they're really old and plants will start to grow. How does a plant even grow in the middle of a sidewalk? Like in that little crack piece, right? Like when we think of things like that, I think it's easy to bring awe and wonder into our life of just thinking like, wow, how did that little plant grow from that seed or in the middle of the sidewalk? Or how does a bird, small bird, not freeze in Canada winter time when it's
Right,
ridiculously cold? Like
right.
so many things that we can easily wonder and be in awe about and just appreciate, which then comes to that having gratitude of
Yes.
where we're at, what we have, what's going on around us, with nature, air, breathing, water, and then, of course, family, friends, community, as we said earlier, it's very, very important.
And that's the reticular activating system at work, because if we are intentional about looking for an awe moment every day and places of gratitude, um, I remember a number of years ago we were trying to figure out what color to paint our front door, and we were building the house, and we were trying to, all right, what color do we want to paint the front door? And so I drove down the road, and all I could see were what color people's front doors were. Or, I mean, I don't notice that anymore, but at the time I did. And
Mm,
if you're about to buy a new car, you are you see that car everywhere. And then once you buy your new
right.
car, you don't really notice it so much. So the reticular activating system is filtering in things that we're interested in. So if we tell our brains, I am interested in knowing, or I am interested in paying attention to things that I can be grateful for. It will look for those things. So you're shifting what you pay attention to.
Right. And that works also in the negative. So people need
Right.
to be aware of what they're paying attention to, because it's very easy, especially now, I find, just because of the internet and everything that's going on in the world, but the internet brings all of that right literally to us. So it
Right.
is easy to go down that negative rabbit hole, just by mistake of you're scrolling, you see something, and there's all those headlines of news stuff because they want you to click. So a lot of it's that fear, clickbait, shock kind of thing. And then you go from one thing to another, and it becomes very easy to then go down that negative rabbit hole. And then, because you've clicked on those things and read those articles, the algorithm thinks, oh, you like
Right.
this. This is what you're interested in. Let's give you
Right.
more of that.
Right. So I guess one of the practices that people could do is actually intentionally click on good news so that they get fed more
Mm.
good news. Not that you can't also pay attention to what's going on in the world, but if you are intentional about clicking on good news, you'll get more of it in your feed.
Pardon the interruption. If you're liking the show so far, please like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. It really means a lot to me. It helps grow the show and the channel and to the show. Yeah, and I do that when I'm on social media. I want to be aware of what's going on in the world, but at the same point, I'm also aware of what can I do about it.
Right.
Right. And I know people think everything starts with one person. Yes, okay, fine. But then what am I going to do about it? So it's the what can I, what am I? And if I don't feel like I can do anything about it, and if I'm not going to do anything about it, then reading those articles or clicking on those posts, and whether it could be what's going on in the world or just always about people who are on vacation, or people who are in better shape than what we are. And if it's a motivator, great. And if it motivates you to do things in a good, healthy, active way, that's great. But if it's one thing that just gets us pressed and worried and scared and things like that, we really need to, it comes back to that awareness. Be
Right.
aware of what we're reading, what we're consuming, and that's even TV shows.
And how does it trigger
Um,
you?
yeah, music
Hmm.
can make you uplifted and feel happy, or it can make you sad and depressed. And so, all as we say, like everything is energy. And so, whatever we're consuming is putting that energy into us. And so, if it's as we perceive it, if it's negative, it's going to bring negative energy into us. But if it's positive and good and uplifting and things, it'll bring that energy as well, whether it's social media clips, music, the news,
Yeah.
everything,
Yeah.
conversations we're having with people.
Yes. Yes. Let's talk for a moment about the science of hope. And I can't remember his last name. His first name is Shane. Shane, somebody, I should have that memorized. I'm escaping me right now, who has developed the science of hope. And from what he's written, and I've got a book about it over there, but what he's written, I've developed this easy to remember acronym, GPA. What's a grade point average? It's a good way to remember it. But the G is for goal. And
Mhm.
I would say maybe goal, but also direction, at least direction.
Mhm.
Then the second part of it is a plan. So you want to have a plan of action, and then the A is action or agency. And so the idea behind it is we feel helpless or hopeless, and we have learned helplessness as well. There's studies about that.
Mhm.
And so if we want to develop hope and have a hopeful attitude, a hopeful disposition, and not get stuck in that negative place, we develop our GPA, which is we have a goal or at least a direction. I'm heading in this
Mhm.
direction because this is in alignment with my values, and it I know that this is a place that will I'll feel like I can make a difference. So that's my goal, or at least my direction. And then,
Right.
well, I can have a big plan, but even if I just take one little teeny tiny step, that's enough of a
Hmm.
P to feel like, okay, I'm moving in the right direction. Little tiny step.
Right.
Like if you don't like what's going on in Washington, contact your representative and your senator, just that one little tiny step. That's all it takes. And then the A is that action because it gives you a sense of agency. When we don't
Right.
have agency, we don't feel like we have agency, that's when we fall into hopelessness. So I think that's a really, really important thing for people to be aware of, especially these days, when so much feels like it's being rammed down our throats. So, yeah.
Right. And everything has ripple effects, right?
Hmm.
So it doesn't have to be this grand big thing that's gonna, all of a sudden change the world. I mean, great if it does. That's great, but I'm also, very realistic in things. But it may change my reality. It may
Yeah.
change things around me. Even just changing my reality could be me like, I did this and I feel better. Now, if it doesn't go anywhere else, I can't really control what other people do, but I did this and I feel better and that's what I can do. And so whether it's um doing stuff to keep your community clean, you're not littering, or and you join a cleanup and you do that. It's like, well, okay, at least I'm doing this. I feel better. I helped to do this. Or yes, I don't like what's going on here, so I filed a complaint with the Better Business Bureau, um, with my local representatives of whatever's going on. And even though we may not there is that ripple effect just because I did it. How many other people have also done it?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I don't know.
Right. Right. And that keeps us out of feeling hopeless when we
Right.
when we when we don't feel like we have a sense of agency. We always have some agency. We just need to be
Mm,
willing to think about what one little step I can take today and then act on it.
right. And you mentioned earlier about learned helplessness. Now, maybe some people have not heard of that term before. So just kind of talk about that and explain what learned helplessness is.
Yeah, I think it was Martin Seligman did he did some research on this decades ago. Um, and it feels cruel to us now. I think he had puppies or dogs or something like that, and maybe it was rats, I don't remember. But the point of it was there was this noise or this little shock that no matter what they did, it just kept going and going and going. They couldn't make it stop. And eventually they just stopped trying to make it go away. And that was learned helplessness because they couldn't do anything about it. Whereas they had I guess, a control group or something where if they did a certain action, they could make it stop the noise or the poking or whatever it was. And so when we're in a situation where and particularly if people come from trauma backgrounds where as children there was nothing that they could do to make the awful things stop, that's a
Mm,
learned helplessness. And I'm not saying it's easy to break out of that. It probably requires therapy depending on how severe it is. But it is possible. And by leaning into this science of hope, it's possible to begin to find a new way forward.
And so what would be some exercises or tasks or things to do for people to, to get that more positive hope, to start to kind of rewire their brain to get rid of those negative
Right.
thoughts and feelings and beliefs to, to have that to get to that gap, to have that action. And I love that metaphor that you use, to have that goal or direction, because it's good to have goals, but those goals lead us in a direction, and to have plan small action steps to do, and then to actually do it, because as we know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and
Mhm.
expecting a different result. And I feel, I mean, it is how it is. I feel, a lot of people by that definition, a lot of people are insane because
Yeah.
we talk about we want changes, we want to do things different, we want a different life, we want to have these things or do these things, but we don't change anything in our day-to-day life. So how can we expect to have change if we aren't changing to make that change happen?
Yes. So there's an interesting story. This is, I mean, it's an extreme example, but if you've heard of the story of Corrie Ten Boom, she and her family were they were in one of the Nazi camps. And at one point, her sister, who was also with her, was had a better attitude than Corey did. And Corey was just like, I don't understand. How can you do this? I can't remember her sister's name. And her sister said, well, let's start by thanking God for the insects. You know, that was one of the things that everybody was complaining about was the lice. And she's, nope, let's thank God for the lice. And Corey was like, I don't want to thank God for the lice. And her sister said, no, we should thank God for the lice. So they did. So they said a prayer. They had a few people around them. They said, thanked God for the lice. And that changed their attitude over time. It changed their attitude. They just a little bit more positive. You know, we have enough agency even to thank God for something that we're not wild about, but okay. And they found out later on it was because of the lice that the guards wouldn't come into the room. So just that little shift of I can change my mindset just a little bit. Thank God for something that doesn't seem worth thanking him for. Um, but there may be a greater purpose behind it. So that, like I said, that's an extreme example. But in
Mhm.
terms of on a daily basis, again, it goes back to that gratitude. What are the things that we can be grateful for? And the thing about gratitude is I I can thank God for my dogs. You know, I love my dogs. I'm so grateful that I have my dogs. But what really helps is if I'm saying I'm thankful for my dogs day after day after day, that kind of loses its oomph, right? So today I can say I am thankful for how much fun it is to throw the frisbee to Kettle because she's so athletic and it's so much fun to watch her. And then tomorrow I can say I'm so thankful that that Phoebe always comes up and puts her head on my lap because I feel loved when she does that. So specificity in gratitude is a really important
Mm.
aspect. And that will allow me to say thank you for something new about my dogs for days and not lose the power of that gratitude practice. So that's one thing. I don't know. Are there some other things that we can talk about?
Well, it's that story that you said reminded me of another one, and I'm gonna butcher it. It's the gist of the story because I know I'm gonna get parts of it wrong. And it was, the parts that I remember was about a farmer who had, I guess he caught a wild horse or something. Anyway, he had a horse, and the neighbors and friends were like, "Oh, you're so lucky you have this horse." And he's like, "We'll see." And his son was trying to train the horse and got bucked off the horse and broke his leg. And they're like,
Mm,
"Oh, that's so bad. Your son broke his leg. Now, he can't help around the farm and do things." And he was kind of like, "Well, it is what it is," kind of thing. And then like a week or 2 weeks later, people from the army came and they were recruiting people for the army, but then his son couldn't go because he had a broken leg. So, "Oh, you're so lucky, your son couldn't go." And he's like, "Well," and it goes on to a few other
right.
things. And of course, we can only connect the dots in hindsight. But
Sure.
when we think about it, even though if we think of, which is similar to that story, even if we think like this is so bad, we have no idea that it could be a blessing in disguise.
Right.
And there's been a few things that have happened for me. There was one last year, and I lost a client of mine. I was like, oh, that really, it kind of sucks. But I mean, part of me was I was thinking about letting them go anyway, but I wanted to be the one to make the decision. So it was like the ego got in there, and I was,
Sure, sure.
but then after I thought, you know what, this it's not a bad thing, and this could be something that in the future that I may say it was the best thing that ever happened because I'd been debating it for months and months. So I really wasn't doing anything to take the action, and they did. And it, as I said, it kind of hurt my ego a bit. But I just thought after, I was like, you know what? I've been wanting this for a while. So, in a way, be careful what you wish for and what you want because you will get it. Um, Not always, but sometimes. And then we don't know. Like, and then I could think it was that blessing in disguise because then these other things have happened. And when we're in it, we just don't know. We're not going to
Yeah,
know until we
and
look
there's
back and say, oh, okay.
and there is almost never growth without a death. I mean, that's a real spiritual principle, but whether it's a seed that dies in order to become a tree, or there are other examples too. But the point is, there is rarely real growth without some sort of death or letting go, or that transformation doesn't happen spontaneously. It happens like a caterpillar. I don't know if you know about a caterpillar. It builds the cocoon and then it literally becomes mush before it's reconstituted and it comes out as a butterfly. So, yeah, tough stuff in life is hard to live through, but it's the only way we are transformed. And if we aren't transformed, then we're stagnant. And if we're stagnant, we're dying. So you're either growing or you're dying. There's really no middle ground. I mean, there are periods of rest, but other than
Hmm.
that, um, you're either growing or you're dying, and you get to choose.
That's right. And I mean, it's that is part of life, and the hard parts are what make us stronger. And I think too, part of the reason why it is hard to change, not only for us, but because our friends and people around us, and they notice the changes and they sometimes don't like it. Sometimes
Hmm.
because they're scared, because part of us has to die for us to change and become the person we want to be.
Right.
And that has those ripple effects as well, because if I'm no longer the person that you love and hang out with and do things with, if I'm not doing those things or just my personality, things are changing. I'm not that same person anymore. And so sometimes those relationships die off with those parts of us that need to die off as well for us to become the people we want to be, to have those new habits that we want, to live the life we want, to then gain new and different friendships and relationships in that new person. And it could happen again. We become that
Right.
person and then we're evolving and changing more. And as we do again, another part of us has to die. Some of those relationships will fall away with it as we become the next version, better version of ourselves.
Right. Right. And for me, I'm always that's I even before I started getting into coaching and neuroscience and all of the other stuff, I still had, I don't know why, but I still had this question every day. I would be like, how can I be a better person today than I was yesterday? And I think that it's not an easy way to wake up every day because it requires something of us. Um,
Mm.
but why not? And maybe it's not every day. Obviously, like I said, some days that we have rest, but for the most part, over the course of a week or a month, for sure, I'd like to think I've learned a few things through hard knocks and a little research and the the loving kindness of people who care about me, and I'll be a little bit more like the person I was created to be.
Absolutely. We can. we can get better just little bits every day. I mean, and some
Hmm.
days will be big days. Some days
Yeah,
big things will happen and that's great. And some days we'll probably feel like we took a little bit of a step backwards. And we have to think that's okay. We just have to then tomorrow's a new day or
right,
it's a new hour. You
right.
know what? Yeah, that happened. Because I often say, and this is a little bit cliche, but I say life can change in 5 minutes. But actually, life can change in 1 minute. I mean, in extreme cases. Um,
Yeah,
Sometimes it's just you answer that phone call and you got that job promotion, and now you're moving across the country to another country, wherever, and your life just changed from that. The very lucky people who win the lottery, well, that happened in an instant
in a
too.
moment.
And yeah, and so there's and of course, like those are grand big things, but there's lots of little things that can happen that our life can change. You can be at the grocery store waiting in line and end up talking to the person in front of you or behind you and developing a relationship or friendship from that.
Right,
And I've
right.
actually had that happen in the grocery store one time. So
Oh
that's
my
why I use
goodness.
that as an
Okay.
example. And I was looking at because I was new in a place and in a grocery store and I went over and I'm like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm sorry, but what are you doing?" And she explained to me what was going on and I was like, "Oh, okay." And we hit it off and became very, very good friends. And we just you never know and just be open to people and conversation and politeness and life can change. Those little things can make changes in our lives.
That's a great story. I like that.
Yeah. People like, "How'd you meet?" I'm like, "In the grocery store." They're like, "Really?" Yeah. Um, so Debbie, if people wanted to get in touch with you, to do some coaching, to find out a little bit more about what you're doing, where is the best place for them to reach out to you?
My website is insideoutministries.info. And the other thing that I do is I write a Substack blog, and that I guess make sure I get the right address for that. There it is. It's Debbie Owen, and that's DebbieOwen, no S, .substack.com. And if they subscribe, they'll get a couple of free resources. One is kind of an Enneagram summary called Knowing Yourself, Becoming Whole. And the other is Not Just the Numbers, How to Lead, Mentor, or Disciple Each Enneagram Personality Pattern. So and then there are a couple of free resources on my website as well. So either the Substack or my website will be a great way. And yeah, I would love to be able to talk with your listeners and your viewers and see where they are and what's important to them, and if there's any way that I could walk with them in some journey that they may be experiencing.
Perfect. And I will make sure to have links in the show notes. So
Great.
for people, it makes it even easier. And just one last question for you. Why should people watch or listen to this episode?
Oh, that's a great question. I think they should watch or listen to this episode and share it. First of all, if you have watched this far, there was something that spoke to you, and I would encourage you to share it now. And I would say, first of all, what spoke to you about it, listener or viewer? And secondly, because I think it's important for us to understand that transformation is something that we are all called to. And there are ways that we can do it, and we can do it in community with others. We can do it with confidence in ourselves. And so don't be afraid of a little change. It's an important part of growing, it's an important part of being a human being.
Perfect. Debbie, thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Sally. It was great.